Welcome, everyone. We have many people from France. Welcome, everyone. We will start in 1 minute. So we have almost 20 people. Farhan, should I start?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this new CICA NEC webinar. I'm pleased to have you here today. So I'm Andine Canton, Policy Officer of CICA. CICA, the construction federation that represents all the construction sector worldwide. So this is the 6th webinar episode we are doing with NEC, and we're pleased for that. All the previous episodes are available on CICA's YouTube channel if you want to check them out. And today's episode will explore the contractual requirement, which establishes a collaborative working relationship from the start. So as you can see, the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation. It will also explain how to foster and achieve this through effective communication, knowing each other's objectives, compliance, leaderships, and so on. So to accompany us on this program today, I'm delighted to introduce Farhan Patel, who is the marketing executive at NEC Contracts. He will remind us of the technical details today. And I'm pleased also to introduce Matthew Garrett, our guest speaker. Matthew is a commercial director at Dalkia and member of the NEC Contract Board. He has spent 30 years working in the UK engineering and construction industry, and he is a chartered surveyor and fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. He previously worked for Constain in the delivery of UK infrastructure and at NG Bailey. So Matthew has approximately 20 years of experience with NEC, so I feel we're in good hands today for this webinar. And before giving the floor to Matthew, Farhan, please, you can do the technical details.
Hello, and thank you, Andine. Yeah, so throughout this webinar, if you at any point have any questions or would like to raise a point of discussion, please feel free to use the Q&A box there. Or if you are already using the chat, then feel free to continue to use the chat. We will be monitoring that at the back while Matthew presents, and we will collate those and answer them at the end of the presentation. Also, during the presentation, there will be points where a poll will be put up. So please, if all attendees could answer those questions, then we'll be able to get a good understanding of where people are at in regards to the topic being discussed. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Matthew.
Thank you, Farhan, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I'm happy to guide you through this topic of the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation. Good evening as well, perhaps to some people. Okay, Farhan, if I could get onto the contents page. So we've had the welcome and introductions. This is the topics I'll talk through in the next 20 minutes or so. What is the NEC contract? And clause 10 in particular, as Andine mentioned, there is an obligation to work in the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation in this contract. So we'll say a little bit about what NEC is, the legal and contractual implication of Clause 10, how NEC contracts encourage and support collaborative working in general, and some points from my own experience of how to establish mutual trust and cooperation in a working relationship between parties on a complex program. And there'll always be time for Q&A at the end. As Farhan said, please feel free to use the Q&A button as we go through the presentation. Andine will be picking up those Q&As ready for to put them to us at the end. Before we go any further, though, I'd like to do a little bit of audience participation. We'll try out the question buttons that Farhan can give us. If we could put up the first poll, Farhan. It's a question of how familiar are you with NEC contracts? Item 1, you've used the contracts on a project or project. Item 2, you're becoming familiar with the contracts but haven't used it yet. Or 3, little knowledge. So click the answer that best describes your experience level, and we can understand then how familiar we are amongst the delegates in the room.
So it is looking like a pretty almost even split. So we've got 43% have used NEC contracts on a project or projects, 21% I am becoming familiar with NEC contracts but haven't used it yet, and then 36% have little knowledge of NEC.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've got a really good spread of experience and people still wanting to learn. So I can take that into account as we go through. Okay, right. Do we share the results or have we just done that?
Yeah, I'm sharing them now, so everyone should be able to see that. Yeah, thank you.
Super. Okay, so in getting to the next slide, Farhan, please.
Yeah.
So what is the NEC contract? So it's a suite of contracts developed and published by the Institution of Civil Engineers in the UK since 1993. NEC 4 is the current edition, published in 2017, and it's a family of contracts covering work, services, and supply, main contracts and subcontracts, long forms and short forms. So it's quite comprehensive in the type of work, services, and supply it can be used for in different situations and on different projects. It's been extensively used in the UK. When I was working with Costain, delivering big infrastructure programs in the UK, I think 95% of the infrastructure programs were delivered in the UK using NEC contracts. It's now the contract is becoming more popular in other geographies. Hong Kong, Peru's taking it up, and I think this is a lot to do with the problem-solving ethos and the collaborative ethos of these contracts. Maybe one of the reasons why it's been used in big complex infrastructure programs in particular. So that's a little bit about NEC. Next slide, please, Farhan. And this is kind of just giving you an overview of how the NEC contract compares to contracts that were traditionally used or maybe historically used, certainly in the UK historically, where if I take the traditional approach, contracts were used to react to problems. So there's a lot of content in the traditional content about what obligations, liabilities, or entitlements you have once something happens. And whereas in the NEC, the emphasis really is about putting processes and actions into place to prevent problems, to close problems down as they arise, and to manage risk as we go. So NEC you might describe as containing way more project management processes, processes that will actually get the job built better, with better outcomes, more efficient, and less disputes. Traditional contracts tell you what's happened when it goes wrong. They tend to record progress, whereas NEC contract actually contains a requirement for programming of remaining work, submission of programs on a regular basis, and agreement or acceptance of programs on a regular basis. hence bringing project management into the contract, not just what happens if it goes right or wrong. The traditional contracts were quite fixed in the risk allocation. They're priced contracts. The pricing risk sits almost entirely with the contractor. NEC has got a range of creative pricing and risk allocation options, from cost reimbursable, where the cost risk and the efficiency risk sits almost entirely with the client, to target contracts where that is a shared risk in terms of efficiency and cost spend, through to price contracts. NEC also allows different compensation events to be added, in the sense additional client risks introduced to the contract through the options that are available in the drafting of the contract. So NEC can be more creative in terms of risk allocation, and it also has provisions for incentives, which is different to risk allocation, but it's another motivational type tool in the NEC facility. So traditional contracts quite often did result in a lot of legal claims, case law, disputes. And the idea of the NEC is to create an environment that reduces the likelihood of dispute and encourages the contract actively encourages and tries to support cooperation and collaboration between the parties focused on the single outcome of the project where possible. So that gives you a kind of where the mindset is with NEC. NEC was originally drafted and invented actually by a project manager, and often said it's a contract written for project managers to help them deliver jobs, not written for lawyers. And that's something that might be another way of categorizing how NEC positions itself. Dr. Martin Barnes is exactly the person I'm referring to. Yeah. Okay, next slide, Diane, I think. So we get this clause 10 in NEC 4. The ECEC refers to the version in the contract set. It's the engineering and construction contract. So NEC 4 ECC clause 10, we have this clause 10.1. The parties, the project manager and supervisor, shall act as stated in the contract. And then secondly, the parties, the project manager and the supervisor, act in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation. So the first obligation is we do what's stated in the contract. Collaboration doesn't mean that we put the contract in a drawer and we all be friendly. We are friendly, but we also do, it's really important under NEC that we do what's stated in the contract. This is part of the being professional, taking the steps to manage the project as we go, not leaving everything to the end. So it very much is about these clauses act together. Acting in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation, trust each other, both parties do as stated in the contract. If both parties do what's stated in the NEC contract, the contract will be a much better outcome. If only one party is doing what's stated in the contract, it won't work. And if the other party is the other, it won't work either. So these clauses are different, but they act together. And I'll come back to this a little bit later about how we do this. How can we act and do? How can we do contractual notices, early warning notices, submit and accept programs, and not come across as being confrontational? That's a really big part of this is behaviours, communication, and how we go about operating the contract. Okay, next slide. So, what does clause 10 actually mean in terms of the parties will act in the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation? What does this mean legally? Well, first of all, I'd start by saying that this, I think certainly in the UK courts, this is treated as a good faith obligation. The parties will act in good faith with each other in all aspects of delivery of the project. But more importantly than that, item 1 here, it is an underlying ethos of the NEC. It's really important that NEC is positioning itself, and the many other ingredients in the contract are there to support and encourage collaboration. Again, because the ethos of NEC is that when parties act together, helping each other, supporting each other, the job will end up with a better outcome for everyone. The actual legal interpretation or practical application of this clause will be very fact sensitive. I think one of the important points to take out of it, though, this good faith obligation doesn't mean that parties can ignore any other part of the contract, or they don't need to comply with this part of the contract because the good faith clause will save them. No, certainly in the UK courts, all of the ingredients of the contract are binding. And I think the good faith obligation to work in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation often comes into play when a court or a tribunal is deciding other points. The item 4 on this slide, it might not be that easy to identify the impact of a failure to act in the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation and say that has caused a particular loss or harm to one or other of the parties. It's more often that if a party has not acted in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation, a judge or tribunal will take that into account when deciding other points. We're not seeing many clear cases turn solely on a case that one party or other has failed to act in the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation. Normally it works in combination with other failures or breaches or claims for entitlement. And certainly my view is, and this is the bottom line, the working collaboratively with trust and cooperation is a good idea, regardless of the contractual obligation. But certainly NEC is putting this up as one of the first clauses to appear in the contract because it underlines the full ethos of the contract in many other respects. So, as I just pause for breath for a minute, I thought we would, again at this point, turn to the audience and see what your views are on or experience of. Have you ever worked on a contract where the parties did not work in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation? Okay. And if you have had that experience, what happened? Was the project a success for everyone? Was the project a success for one party only? Or was it a disaster for everyone? And then there's a third question. I can't see the third question at the moment. I can't drag it down. There's a third question, I think. And do you think projects would be more successful if contracting parties tried harder to maintain trust and cooperation? So from what I'm seeing so far, there's quite a lot of people have worked on a project where no one worked with mutual trust and cooperation. That's not a shock. And where that happened, it doesn't look like anyone benefited. We're not even seeing it was a success for one party. We're basically seeing it was a bad experience for everyone. And yeah, 92% of people on the call think that projects would be more successful if contracting parties do more to maintain trust and cooperation. There's maybe one vote for people who think not. Maybe that's a lawyer. It'd be more successful for the lawyers if parties did less to work with mutual trust and cooperation, maybe. But no. Is it worth putting that poll up, Farha?
Yeah, I will end the poll now and share the results. So that should pop up for your screens as well, so you can see.
So there you go. And I think if there is a scroll bar like it is on my screen, you can sort of scroll down and see. So I think that's a fairly strong sense that that I have got some people on the webinar agreeing with my conclusion that we should be trying harder to work with trust and cooperation, and it would be a better outcome from everyone if we could succeed in that. Now, I think it's well worth mentioning at this point that with all best endeavours, it's not easy to work through a big infrastructure program with lots of complexity, lots of difficulty, lots of challenges, and still maintain a uniform spirit of mutual trust and cooperation across the teams. It's a very difficult thing to do, and that's something I'll be bringing to life a little bit in the next few slides. That's maybe next slide, Farhan. So first of all, clause. I'll just explain a little bit more about outside clause 10, how the NEC contracts encourage and support collaborative working. What other ingredients do the contracts have? So obviously we talked about clause 10, that's sort of setting the tone, setting the standard. We have this clause 15. We have an early warning mechanism where either party can, or is required to, give a notice to the other party whenever they see something that might or could increase the cost or damage the program or the quality of the works. So an early warning obligation such that the parties can then come together, and this is nothing to do with claims or entitlements, this is pure risk management. Either party can give an early warning and the parties all get round and try and collaboratively solve the problem. So it's almost like 2 minds, 3 minds are better than one, solving all the problems that arise on the job. It doesn't matter whose risk that event or issue could be, everyone tries to solve it, which is, you know, a great place to start. The process for accepting and submitting regular submission and acceptance of programs, again, part of this ethos of let's put some project management into this contract, not just legal entitlements and liabilities. And there's a process there that everybody now understands. They've got clarity of the forward program, the delivery program, and the resources that go into that. The process of change is called compensation events, and there's a few things that apply here to make to support collaboration. First of all, when a compensation event arises, they are notified, quoted, using actual cost as the sort of basis rather than rates or entitlements. So there's a certain level of open book or actual cost based. They're supposed to be compensation, not something that people will profit from. And the NEC includes some strict timetables and processes that require the parties to agree them as you go, not leave them to the end. So that kind of helps in just getting everything resolved as you go, confronting problems, closing them down, keeping everything on track. On the options C and D, the target contracts, you've got an open book, cost reimbursable commercial model, and obviously, so option C and D are target contracts. Option E is cost reimbursable. All of these are open book, cost reimbursable. These models are used quite extensively, certainly in the UK, on big infrastructure programs. And I think the open book, cost reimbursable model does give rise to a certain level of openness, sharing of information, and in the target models, there's definitely a case that risks are shared, so that when the job, if the job overspends the target, the cost is shared 50% or according to agreed percentages between client and contractor. So open book models, cost reimbursable models, everything is open, nothing is hidden, kind of is a good platform for collaboration. NEC also has secondary options that allow multi-party collaboration where parties are jointly incentivized with other contractors, maybe on the same project or program, to align and incentivize. And the option X22 for early contractor involvement is a really good way to set a job up for success where you're bringing your contractor, maybe even their supply chain. They were being appointed early in the process, maybe before the design is fully developed, on some basic commercial or quality or performance criteria, and they work through a two-stage procurement process. In the first stage, where they are working, contributing to the developing design, working up proposals in terms of cost, program, even the final solution, managing risks before the contractor agrees a price program and the scope with the client, and enters into the second stage, which is the construction stage. So there's a whole early contractor involvement period where the parties work together to develop the solution before signing or moving to the phase where they're doing the full construction. That's a really good place to start for collaborative delivery. And lastly, in the dispute resolution provisions, the senior representatives process is useful in the sense that the parties don't just dive off into dispute. The pre-named senior representatives will get together and see if they can find a way to solve the dispute. We also now have some suggested clauses for alternative dispute resolution that may involve the senior representatives or some external expert. That, again, ways in which of resolving potential disputes before they become formal legal disputes. So a few options in there. So amongst all of these things, certainly a contract cannot make people collaborate, and a contract itself doesn't mean people will collaborate, but it helps if the contract has enough ingredients that help and support and encourage the parties to collaborate. And this is what NEC does. Okay, and what I'll do now is I'll talk to you about what I mentioned just then. The contract can't do all the work. The parties do have to make an effort and put some techniques and practices in place to foster and make sure that the mutual trust and collaboration does survive the whole experience of the delivery of the contract. So if we go on to the next slide, Farham. So these are some things I've learned. I've got about 12 tips here. These are nothing but tips from my own experience of working on big infrastructure programs and difficult. And the first point is that there will always be problems to overcome. Okay, there is no such thing as finding a way of removing the difficulty of big, complicated projects. So skill and effort will be required. People can easily get defensive and drift into conflict when things get difficult, which they will. So the first point sets the tone for the rest, actually. And the second point is quite obvious, really. Communication is key to establishing a trusting, cooperative relationship. And this applies in any relationship, actually. But we find more so nowadays that there's a lot of people will communicate from behind the safety of a keyboard. And I think some of the things I'm pulling out here are, the way you communicate, there's a whole different range of methods available for communication and a whole different range of people you can communicate with. But this whole communication piece is going to be key to keeping a job on track and keeping the relationships and people working together. My third point is that the leaders of the parties play a huge part. I think we all know in business generally, there's a thing called the leadership shadow. People will do what you do more than do what you say. They must see you leading by example. So when the going gets tough, the leaders have to show that they're still working together, not getting in the trenches with their teams, thinking about how they're going to ambush or prosecute their claim against the other. The leaders need to step up when the going gets difficult and show their teams that we are both trying to sort this out for a win-win outcome at the end of the project. So Leaders need to role model the required behaviours. They're on stage all the time, and people will copy them. So the fourth point, all parties will benefit from maintaining trust and cooperation, a point we made earlier. And I talked this, another way of putting this is being considerate and helping each other. If relationships deteriorate and the project becomes a battlefield, things will get worse for everyone. So, and I've seen lots of really horrible examples here where, let's say one party has notified a delay. The other party now thinks they're under attack and then starts a correspondence war. People are writing letters to each other or issuing contract communications to each other, blaming each other for delays. Programs are now not done, accepted. Compensation events are being disputed. Everything gets worse for everyone. None of the parties are getting into a great position. Nothing's getting solved collaboratively, and the job will go backwards. I think the poll we did earlier certainly matched my experience. When this happens, things get worse for everyone. And this is why I will put a lot of effort into trying to avoid this happening on a project. And what that doesn't mean is, it doesn't mean we don't operate the contract. We still need to operate the contract. And if a problem has occurred, it does need raising and it does need notifying. But we must find a way through this collaboratively. We can't let that situation become a terrible battlefield. So I've got some more points on how we can do this. So these are now, I'm getting now into some of the points on how to stop all that happening, really. So my fifth point is setting the project up for success from the outset, using standard forms of contract as far as possible without lots of amendments. And use of a collaborative procurement process. I mentioned the idea of a two-stage or a pre-construction services period and or negotiated or a combination of those. It's a great place to start than a lowest cost competitive tender on a contract which is attempted to transfer a substantial amount of risk down the supply chain. Okay, it's a very obvious point, I think. And item 6, getting things set up from the start, joint training sessions and workshops at the outset of a project to communicate contract ingredients and how we want to operate them can be really effective. So what I'm saying here is that every contract for a project is unique. It won't be the same as the contract that the team worked on their last project. The project will be unique. Every project is unique. So it's really important that the ingredients and the really important steps that we want the parties to take that are written into those contracts are communicated. If they're not, we might as well not have these contracts. So doing joint training sessions where you would have the client team, maybe the professional team, the contractor, maybe some key supply chain, and we communicate the key contract ingredients, where responsibilities start and finish for each party, how early warnings work, how NEC works, okay? And more importantly, how we want to operate them on this project. Maybe there's a electronic contract management system. Maybe there's certain people need to be involved with certain parts of those processes. How we want to operate these. Doing these in joint face-to-face workshops can be really effective in creating alignment between the teams. And we start off with a win-win in mind and the best project outcome in mind. Okay, next slide, Farham. I'll continue with these ideas. And item 7, back to repeat what we said earlier, both parties should do what it says in the contract. The NEC contract does contain a lot of process for getting stuff resolved, and with some strict periods for replying or issuing submissions. And if something needs to take longer, agree extensions to those periods. Don't just let's just let everything drift. Another important point about how doing what it says in the contract, it's incumbent on both parties to be sensible and credible, provide explanations and support to their commercial submissions as required. And to maintain that credibility, that integrity, the level of trust, it goes a long way if both parties can treasure really the trust and influence that they get from being trusted and being credible and being sensible. Point I made earlier, actually, senior level relationships at one or more levels above the project team can really help when things get difficult on the project. These senior level relationships, call them, let's say they're regional managers or sector directors or geographic directors of the parties. They really can play a part. They'll nearly always be needed at some point where the project team have really, maybe genuinely got a disagreement and they can't solve it. And senior level people who are less entrenched, less compromised by the issues themselves might be able to find a way through this. And if sometimes there are personalities who are clashing on a project, sometimes the people have got in too deep with a problem, and maybe at certain times the senior level people need to change out the people in the project. But I think to keep the job on track, these senior people are sometimes needed, and very good idea to get those relationships or regular meetings set up right from the word go between people who sit above the project. Item 9. So this is to do with the NEC clause 3, where it requires a regular submission of a program of work by the contractor and an acceptance or rejection of that program by the project manager. This is just something I use as an indicator actually on NEC projects. It's a really interesting indicator. Projects where the programs are regularly being submitted and regularly being accepted, it's a very strong indicator that teams are working together. Where I see projects, and I do measure this KPI on NEC projects, where I see projects where the programs are not being submitted or not being accepted regularly, it's an indication the project teams are not working very well together. So it's a very just if I was to pick one indicator on the use of NEC contracts, that whether or not things are going well or not at any given point, this is one. And it's well worth investigating and supporting to see if we can make some changes. Because if the contractor and the client cannot agree on a program of works, how are we going to get this job built efficiently? Item 10. So, and this item 10, I'm talking now about open plan offices with teams integrated. Project managers from the client, the project manager, or the contractor all sitting together, planners in another area, environmental teams in another area, commercial teams, yes, sitting together. This works really well on the target on cost reimbursable projects where all the costs are open anyway. There is nothing to hide. And we got sharing of risks. Early warnings are notified and the teams quickly gather round and try and solve those problems. Makes communication and problem solving easier. You overhear the conversations of the client, or the client overhears the conversation of the contractor, and they're often able to help. Whereas if they didn't hear, they wouldn't know we have those problems. That's a good tip. And this is so out of that all sitting together, item 11, encourage teams to identify potentially difficult issues. And instead of communicating them by email or a contract communication or a letter, let's go and have a chat face to face before issuing the written communication. And this is about, I've done this on projects and it's a very simple thing. But it goes a long, long way to how the message is received. And I think we all know when we're about to issue, let's say it's a notice of a compensation notification, or we're notifying there's a delay, or we're notifying that there's been a problem that's resulting in a cost. We know the ones that are going to be badly received. And what I'm advocating here is just go and speak to someone face to face. Maybe it's the project manager, maybe it's the client, and say, look, we've got this issue. And what you're really trying to do here is manage the potential misunderstanding of your actions. You know, we are trying to solve it. We've had a look at it from this angle. We're having a look to see if we can mitigate it. We're not just giving you the problem. And I think this face-to-face communication before issuing the written communication, sometimes the client, I'll put myself in the contractor's shoes here, sometimes the client will say, oh, could you hold that just for 24 hours? I do need to go and mention this to someone else before it lands. Or can I see the word? Can you word it slightly differently? It would be so much easier for me to handle if you took that word out. And this sort of cooperation on what is recognized to be a difficult issue goes a long way to avoiding warfare. In fact, they might even be so impressed you've come and spoke to them that you're showing care and attention, that the relationship is even stronger. Not easy, but a really good tip. And the other thing, item 12, NEC contracts, as most contracts do, require things to be notified, submitted, and agreed. So let's talk about change. Compensation events require assessments, either extension of time assessments or cost assessments, or both. A lot of these things can be sort of pre-agreed between teams to some extent before the formal submission under the contract. I talked about the regular submission of programs and acceptance. Big programs I've worked on, I've seen the planners working together on those programs. When I say planners, they're schedulers. I've seen them working together on these programs, the clients, the project managers, schedulers, or the clients, schedulers, and the contractor schedulers. So the schedulers are sort of agreed before it's submitted. So that helps things go smoothly. And it really does help to talk about things and try and get some alignment before you submit is a big message here, if we can. Right, so there's my 12 things of tips of how to try and establish a spirit and maintain a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation in delivering problematic contracts. Andine, I turn to you and see if we've got any questions.
Thank you, Matthew, for the presentation. And yes, indeed, we have a few reactions and questions. Maybe, so I will start with the first one. It was referring to your slide 6, where you were talking about the legal and contractual implications. You had the 4 points.
Yes.
And Richard Turud is asking why the good faith is absent from the text.
Okay, and I think the reason is here that NEC contract has tried to use plain English language, not legal terminology. So anyone in the world could translate the NEC contract to another language, and it would be easy for them to translate. So using the most straightforward language possible, and maybe good faith is a little bit legally coded. Maybe it means something legally that it doesn't mean in plain English. And maybe mutual trust and cooperation is making it more straightforward, saying it as it is. I think that's the way NEC approached this. They tried to write it in plain English rather than a legal term.
Okay, thank you. Another question on, so the slide 8, you were presenting the tips on how to establish mutual trust and cooperation. And Chadi Khaled reacted by saying that the open book practice is not practical and not accepted everywhere. Any recommendation about that?
Okay, I understand this. And let me give you an example. There was a big project in Antwerp, Belgium, the Erstering project, that had NEC and open book contracts had never really been used in Belgium, in Antwerp before. And I went along to speak to, the client team decided to try and go down this route, but I went along to speak to the contractors, and they were very afraid of this, very afraid of opening up their books. And I think it is a cultural thing. It is a giant leap of faith. And what you find is, I mean, unless you're in a culture where, I mean, my experience is contractors are not incurring costs that are not real. They're not claiming costs that are not real. They're incurring enough costs that are real. Normally, just to open up your books and show people what you're spending, actually, it turns out to be more helpful than unhelpful to a contractor. Okay, it's my experience of working on these things. It unlocks a huge amount of openness, quite often a lot of sympathy, because people may not realize how much you're spending on certain things, and it's recognized you might be overspending on some things, you might be underspending on others. And the way the NEC contract works, you're not disallowed costs because you're inefficient. When you're going into an actual cost reimbursable contract, there are only limited grounds to disallow cost. The client is sharing as bought into, and is taking a share of responsibility for your efficiency and inefficiency. So you might be thinking as a contractor, I got the worst of both worlds here. I'm going to show them my costs and they're going to pick holes in all my costs. No, that's not how it works. The contract doesn't allow people to pick holes in your costs. Your costs are your costs.
Thank you. A fourth question. So Alfonso Pelosi is asking for clarification about the planning. So do you mean to schedule the activities in order to complete within the time for completion, or to warn the other party and agree on extension of time?
That's a really good question. So when we're talking about the submission of programs and schedules, there's absolutely two functions for this in the NEC contract. First of all, there is the project delivery function, in that everybody has clarity of the sequence of activities, the duration of activities, and the full schedule of activities to complete the project. And that helps a lot of people plan, make decisions, and assist, actually. But it also has the added benefit then of creating a mutually agreed schedule that can be used as the work proceed to estimate the delay impact of an event. And that is what NEC does. It actually prescribes a method and a formula for establishing an extension of time assessment using that program that you've got in place through the monthly or the weekly or the fortnightly submission and acceptance of programs, or schedules as you might call them. So it does act on both.
Thank you. Now from Bettina Geisler, it's a remark and then a question. So risk allocation is an important way to calculate cost and required time for execution, which in the final consequence will be as well a question of cost price adjustment. How does a creative approach will work? I am not convinced that fixed risk allocation and mutual trust are opponents.
No, they're not opponents. I think fixed risk allocation. Now we're talking about pricing risk, okay? So, and it's obviously, if the way I'd explain this is, if I've got a highly complex program, which has got a huge amount of uncertainties, a huge amount of interfaces, a huge amount of complexity, and if I'm trying to, as a client, I hold a lot of that risk because it's not priceable for a contractor. Things like ground conditions risk, things like weather, things like the interfaces, it may be planning risks, maybe design risks. And if I'm putting a contractor on a price contract, there's going to be a huge amount of change, and that will just result in huge amount of claims. Yeah. If I've got that same project and same program, which is a huge amount of complexity, interface, unknowns, uncertainty, and I put them on a cost reimbursable contract, I might get a better outcome. I get probably the same. I probably get a less conflict, less claims. They'll spend less on lawyers, but we still get the job built. And as a client, it might be the most efficient way for me to deliver the job by choosing that flexible allocation. Whereas I will take the cost risk, I'll get the claims teams off the pitch. I don't want 1,000 claims every month for everything that is changed, design didn't work out, ground conditions. If it's that complex, it's a false sense of risk allocation to put that risk on the contractor. I might be getting a better outcome as a client by saying, look, I'll start the job with cost reimbursable. I could also at some point in the job negotiate a price to finish. But what I'm trying to say is a range of different risk allocations can give a client a better way of delivering a job depending on the circumstances, not one size fits all.
Thank you, Matthew. Maybe so 2 last questions. They are more general. What type of personal qualities will make a good project manager?
Wow. Well, I'm not a project manager, but what I will say, well, first of all, I did say, didn't I? Communication is key. A very good communicator, someone who understands the contract, a very good listener, and some very good management skills, I would say. Knowing when to be tough, knowing when to listen and be flexible, and the person who can manage a wide range of stakeholders in a very complex delivery environment. It'll be my initial off the top of the head.
Thank you. And the last one, have you experienced any negative aspects, related to collaborative contracts?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I've been on some really collaborative contracts. They've all had difficult moments. Negative aspects of different. Yes, I think what I will say here is there is a tendency for people to think that collaboration means you don't notify any bad news. So you'll be saying, oh, you're not being collaborative now. You've got all these notices of things that have gone wrong. We say, well, they're early warnings. And so maybe there is a sense that when collaboration is misinterpreted as don't give me any bad news, that's being contractual. And I think that's where the message comes from clause 10.1. Collaboration is doing what it says in the contract, both doing what it says in the contract, but doing it collaboratively.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So I think we answered all the questions in the chat. So Matthew, do you want to say a last few words before closing this webinar?
No, listen, it's been a privilege to talk to members of CICA. I know there's people on this webinar from all around different places of the world. And I would say it's obvious you're all curious about NEC contracts. That's a really great thing. It might not be for everyone. My other word of warning would be do not try the NEC contract. All the parties need to understand what the NEC contract requires them to do, and it's not like another contract. So if you do have a go with NEC contracts, make sure everyone is trained, make sure everybody understands how to operate it. Don't try and have a go if no one understands the rules.
Yeah, but just following on from that, actually, that's a really good segue into we do have training courses at an introductory level available, including introduction to the ECC contract or preparing an ECC contract. These are available virtually. They're delivered by NEC experts, usually with wealth of experience with NEC, interactive training. And you can find that in the resources tab in Zoom. Now, if you go at the bottom and you click resources, there should be a link to the NEC training program, but also a link to CICA's autumn conference, which is coming up on the 21st of November and does feature NEC expert Shai Jackson. But Andine, I don't know if you wanted to speak more on that.
Yeah, I can just add that so the conference will take place on the 21st of November. As Farhan said, you have the registration and the program in the resources part of your Zoom platform. And and we will have a speaker from NEC that will present us an innovative, collaborative urban project. So it should be really interesting. So don't hesitate to join.
Thank you. And just finally, there's also the NEC Digital new product launch coming soon. So all of the features of the contract will be available shortly in an easy-to-use digital platform as well. So keep an eye on that. We'll be posting about that regularly on our socials and on emails. But yeah, thank you so much for joining, and thank you to CICA and Andine for collaborating with us yet again.
Thank you very much. And the replay will be available in a few days on CICA's YouTube channel and maybe on NEC's. So don't hesitate to go see the replay, and you can ask questions also afterwards.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a good day or good evening.
Thanks. Bye.